The drug industry is bigger than anyone would imagine, according to someone who should know.
James Mills, who wrote The Underground Empire, says the world's leading drug dealers very often have close government ties. And they find America's war on drugs an amateur operation.
I recently talked with Mr. Mills about his book.
If we really wanted to stop the drugs, we would go to countries where they're grown and tell those countries to stop. 95% of all the cocaine in the world originates in two little countries, Peru and Bolivia, combined population equal to the population of California. If we made those countries stop growing coca where it is legal to grow coca, we would eliminate 95% of the cocaine just like that.
And how would we do that?
Well, I think we might start out by looking at how we did it in 1972 with heroin in Turkey. 80% of all the heroin in the United States came from Turkey. President Nixon told the Turks to stop growing opium, and he said it in a way that made it clear that this was not just a publicity thing. He wasn't just doing this for public consumption. He really meant it. They stopped. Heroin availability plunged in the United States and around the world. You do it by being serious. You do it by letting them know that you mean what you say, that it's not just a publicity ploy.
You're an award-winning journalist with a magazine, and you've written books. And how did you decide to get involved with CENTAC? Let's explain what CENTAC is.
CENTAC was a unit within the Drug Enforcement Administration which had a unique mission. Its only mission was to take the largest of the large, global, multinational trafficking groups and immobilize them. And not just to arrest a few of the people at the top, but to take a scalpel and draw right around that organization and just take it out. If it was hundreds and hundreds of people all over the world, they were the only people who had that single mission.
How'd you hear about CENTAC?
I had been doing research 4 or 5 years earlier in Bangkok for another book, and I met a lot of DEA agents and had remained in touch with them. One of them, this was around Christmas of '79, invited me to dinner, and I went to dinner. There were other senior DEA people there, and I kept hearing the word CENTAC. And I would say, what's CENTAC? And the questions would be just very politely evaded, ignored. And the next day, however, I was taken to an office and introduced to the chief of CENTAC, who closed his door and shut off his phone and spent 4 hours telling me all about CENTAC.
Why would he spend 4 hours telling a journalist about CENTAC?
Well, because I don't think he looked at me exclusively as a journalist. I was vouched for by some DEA agents. They knew that they had been able to read things I'd written before. They knew me personally. They knew that I wasn't going to lie. They knew I could be trusted. And that if I wrote anything, I was going to write the bad as well as the good, but I wasn't going to tell lies.
Well, you didn't just hear about what was going on in CENTAC. You actually got involved and were right there when what kinds of things were happening. Give us a little bit of the juice.
Well, it's always nice if you're a journalist to be an eyewitness and write about it that way, rather than to have to go back historically and interview lots of people, which I had to do for part of the book. But I, in many cases, was able to be in the middle of the operation, to be in the cars, in the hotel rooms, wherever the negotiations were taking place, when informants were being debriefed and directed. When the informant would come back in and they'd say, "What did he say to you?" And he'd say, "Well, he told me this and this." "All right, you go back to him and say this, 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 and this, and put a wire on him and send him out."
You're not just talking about busting up operations that you see on television, or you see pictures of.
No, I'm talking about, I was following operations that, well, there was one in particular that was, it started in Tucson, Arizona. It was in San Francisco, California. I was in Bangkok with it. I was in Hong Kong with it. It was all over the world. 3
key players that CENTAC was after.
Well, there were 3. They were after about 5 organizations when I was with it, which was just too much. I followed 3 most closely. One was a Donald Steinberg, who was operating a marijuana organization out of Fort Lauderdale.
A soft-spoken Midwesterner.
From Chicago, a suburb of Chicago. He was making more money every single day than the President of the United States makes in a 4-year term.
Wow.
He had a greater income than U.S. Steel. He had operations all over the United States. He had an airline in Panama, shipping companies in Amsterdam and Singapore, a trading company in Hong Kong, pot fields in Thailand and Kenya. He was absolutely everywhere.
How could you not find him? And briefly, the 2 others.
One was a Cuban operating out of Mexico. He came very close, I think, and agents think, to overthrowing the Mexican government. He was associated with several intelligence organizations. Very, very big, doing heroin, cocaine, and marijuana all over the world.
And again, you're talking about the governments. And the 3rd?
And the 3rd, he was very tight with the Mexican government. The 3rd was a Chinese operating out of Bangkok. exporting the lion's share of Southeast Asian heroin into the United States, principally through San Francisco. He also very highly connected with governments.
And everything in this book is true?
Yes.
It sounds
To
fascinating.
my knowledge, certainly.
Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for
Sounds
having me.
fascinating.